So this guide is going to be hopefully on the shorter end. This is essentially just going to be covering the enchantment slots that the sorceress class possesses. Now, sorceress has a unique class-based system called enchantments. You complete a quest, you get access to those 2 enchantment slots that are at the bottom right there. I can't arrow down over it, I don't know why. But essentially what they are is, I have Flame Shield and Blizzard. I believe if my math is correct, there's 21. Let's see, 4, 6 is 10, 14, 17, 21, yeah. There's 21 enchantments in the game. Unfortunately, the way the enchantment system works is that there are only 2 enchantment slots that are given to you as a sorceress player. One is at level 15, and one is at level 30. The problem is, of the 21 enchantment slots, you can divide them essentially into 3 categories, which are S tier, which are essentially the 3 to 4 enchantments that every single class in the game, or every single sorceress build, I should say. We'll say every class of sorcerers. If I say class, it's basically a substitute for build, even though that's all different sorceress builds. You'll see why I'm doing this in a minute. But the S tier enchantments are essentially the sorceress enchantments that every sorceress player can use, and thus those 4 are maybe 5 are competing for 2 enchantment slots on everybody. Then you'll have the A tier enchantments, where the A tier enchantments are unique options that you could put in there.
Look.
Who is spamming that?
Look.
No.
Look.
I will literally go to another town.
Look.
Okay. We're going to another town. I'm not listening to this, we're going to another town. The A tier enchantments are the enchantments that you have that you could, A or B tier, whatever you want to call them. Let's call them B tier, I guess, fuck it. B tier enchantments are the enchantments, like, you could maybe put them in if you had more room for enchantments. And then you have your F tier enchantments that you're not really running because they're not impactful enough to really see value, or they're too difficult to proc the effect of. That's the main thing we're looking at. So, let's look at the enchantments, let's see what we got. Now, it's kind of funny that the enchantments off the basic skills are really good for the most part when most sorceress players don't want to use basic skills to begin with. They're trying to use core skills as much as possible. But some of the best enchantments are here. Arguably the worst out of these is the Spark enchantment. Killing enemy has a 14% chance to form a crackling energy. This is going to be a B tier one. This is specifically if you are a crackling energy build. If you are not a crackling energy build, if you're a regular lightning sorceress, you're not running this, that limits it to B tier. You could make an argument that it goes down to F tier because, you know, it only works in one build. But in that one build, it is something you definitely want to run in order to maintain crackling energy. Next up, you have the Frostbolt one. Dealing direct damage from skills applies up to 21% chill. This is a B tier. Now, this is interesting. This is a skill that a lot of players want to run. A lot of players look at this and say that this is great because as you deal damage with skills, particularly fire skills can apply this, the 21% chill, and this, which gives you the burning damage. These two stack very well together, and everything's constantly burning and chilling. The problem specifically why this is not as good is that the downside is it's an extra form of crowd control that may or may not be beneficial to you. See, enemies cannot be affected by multiple forms of crowd control at a time. It is possible to chill and stun an enemy, but an enemy cannot be both stunned and frozen at the same time. The stun will be removed when the enemy eventually chills enough to where they freeze. When they come out of a freeze, they will not remain stunned. You'd have to reapply a stun. Same thing with immobilize. Immobilized enemies can't be stunned. Because of the way that synergy works, where some crowd control effects overlap, whereas some don't. And vulnerable, by the way, is not a type of crowd control. It's a form of damage. It is not a form of crowd control. So you can apply vulnerable and chill, no problem. You can apply a vulnerable, chill, stun, no problem. But again, the same thing's going to happen. The enemy can remain vulnerable even if they're chilled and then frozen and then stunned. That's not the point. But I see that getting mixed up a lot. Here's the main thing you have to look at, though. The chill isn't as effective as the burning damage. Yes, chill does stack over time and build up to enemies being frozen, which is very good if you're trying to freeze enemies rapidly. However, there are more legendary effects that are tied to damage to burning enemies. And one of the infinite mana ones where your burning damage and pyromancy damage triggers Firebolt. Firebolt is an S tier one. Everyone wants to run this because any form of damage from your skills specifically, not legendary aspects, but your skills specifically. I see this a lot of times where people run the ice spikes off of Blizzard or Deep Freeze, and oh yeah, that doesn't trigger. The damage from Blizzard or Deep Freeze itself is what's triggering the burning damage, not the actual ice spike. Just clearing that up. Firebolt, though, is so good because what it does is any damage that you're dealing with any of your buttons that you're pressing is going to be applying that burning damage. Now, that burning damage is over time, is not very consistent. It's bonus damage in combat. Fire lightning is very good for this reason. Fire ice can be very good depending on your ice build. For example, Blizzard Frozen Orb builds are better than, say, Ice Shards and Frost Nova builds for the Firebolt. Lightning does very well with this because of Ball Lightning, because of Charge Bolts, because of Lightning Spear. That's a nice synergy I was running there for a while. However, this is the big however for me. I am not a very big fan of the chill one. I've run this. I don't think it's as consistently effective for the majority of my builds as the Firebolt one. That's why I have this in B and not S, whereas I have this one in S. This one is very good, and this is one of the ones that almost every single sorceress runs as their enchantment. Another one that's also very good that I think is an S tier as well is Arc Lash. Arc Lash makes it so that anytime you use a cooldown, enemies that are around you, this is close enemies, this is melee range, and a little bit outside of the close melee range bubble, it's a little bit outside of that mark, they get stunned for half a second. The reason why this is effective is because this can render, there's no cooldown on this, this can render groups of enemies immobilized for the most part, if you can stagger your cooldowns effectively. So if you are a player that runs multiple defensive skills, multiple enchantments, and a ultimate, you can get value. Now, one of the reasons why some people would maybe put this in the B instead of the S is because a lot of sorceresses run 2 or more skills that don't have a cooldown. There's a lot of times where you'll only have 2, even 3 cooldowns on a build that can hold this back, but any sorceress build can take advantage of it. Every sorceress is going to run some form of a cooldown. There is not a sorceress build out there that I have seen that is running 1 basic skill and 5 core or mastery skills. There's at least 1 defensive skill that's going to be run, at least 1 conjuration, and ultimate ability. Even if you sacrifice an ultimate ability, if you're battle mage and you don't want that, you're going to be running a defensive skill or a conjuration at the very least, which as long as you have 2 cooldowns, you can get some value out of this, particularly on shorter cooldown skills. So we're talking things like, if you run teleport, and a lower cooldown like Ice Blades, right? Teleport Ice Blades is a very good wombo combo for triggering the R Clash. I wouldn't say that this is great, but it's an extra stun. It's an extra form of crowd control for the build. So, S, S, B, and B. Now we come down to core skills. Core skills actually have very niche applications the majority of the time. There's very few skills in here that are going to be in S tier. They're mostly going to be B's or F's. So, it's kind of funny too because some options are distinctly better in certain builds, but are okay in most builds. The first one we're going to talk about is Incinerate. This is an F tier. Every 14 seconds, a serpent will spawn and incinerate enemies for 8 seconds. This is, in theory, very good. Every 14 seconds, basically, a mini Hydra pops up and will cast Incinerate for 8 seconds within a short radius around it. The problem with this strategy is Incinerate itself is not a very good skill. Therefore, this is not a very good skill. Even though that the duration is good and the proc time isn't that long, this just simply isn't valuable enough in an Incinerate build. The only exception to the rule is if you are a full Incinerate, for whatever reason you're running Incinerate, you're maxing it out, and you have the legendary while channeling Incinerate. That, if that applied to the enchantment as well, I would then maybe move this from F to B. Until they do, this is still just going to be garbage, unfortunately. If you want passive damage, Firebolt is better passive damage. That's the problem, unfortunately, where Firebolt is just so good for passive damage that anything else that is a passive damage skill either needs to be really good or fit a build. Next up, you have Fireball. Fireball's enchantment is that whenever you kill an enemy, they explode in a fireball for 50% of its damage. So, this is very good in specific builds, but it's a B tier. This is very good in builds that chain kill. Chain Lightning, Shatter Frost builds, the Chain Meteor build, where everything dies relatively quickly. You have these big bursts because each enemy you kill has the explosion. I've been kind of going back and forth on my Lightning Sorceress, bouncing between a couple of enchantments for the second slot. Fireball is something I've used heavily, and it's really fun because of how everything in the Lightning Tree likes to chain around, at least how the Lightning Tree is built. However, there are some distinct advantages, more slow burn builds that rely on chilling enemies, like Blizzard, Frozen Orb builds. If they're not building around Shatter, if they're building around Avalanche, you're going to have a harder time. Fire builds that are not dealing crit damage, that are based around the burning damage, this does not benefit you on. This is much slower. Now, the reason why I say that this is kind of funny is that this can chain damage very quickly, and that chaining of damage can make large groups essentially kill themselves in a domino effect one after another. Now, comparing this to the passive damage of Firebolt, the passive damage of Firebolt is more consistent, but is not as lethal as this. This is a chain reaction, domino reaction. Get one kill and chain all the way down. That's what makes this skill decent. It's not S tier. Not every class is fighting to run this, and not every class can slot this in, as we said before. Ice Shard sorceresses, Charge Bolt sorceresses, Firewall sorceresses. You guys are not running this. Don't get your hopes up. Like, yes, you could get an Ice Shard that procs on one enemy and kills them, but you would then need the Ice Shard ricochets to then kill other enemies and chain that. This works best in builds where damage can bounce very quickly, and this does give you a decent effect. The only downside, however, is when they say that it explodes in a fireball for 50% of its damage, what they are referring to is the base fireball. So, for example, I have no points in the fireball. What this means is it says ideal 2300 to 2800. Let's low roll that at, well, let's high roll that 2400. When it says that they explode in a fireball dealing 50% damage, that means that each enemy will explode, maxing at 1400 damage. Now, that's with no points into it. So, obviously, people would assume, okay, I'll put 5 points into this, nothing else, and I get the value of the enchantment. No. No, you do not. It's going to remain at 50% of that base value of the enchantment. So your weapon damage is going to be more important than actually leveling that skill. That's another reason why it's a decent skill as well, because you don't have to actively level it. None of the enchantments are based off of the leveling of a skill at all, which is kind of unfortunate. Next off, you have Frozen Orb. Frozen Orb is that whenever you cast a non-basic skill, this can be any cooldown or any mana spending skill, you have a 30% chance to launch a Frozen Orb at a nearby enemy. Now, the Frozen Orbs that are launched are not affected by how much leveling you've done in Frozen Orb. So the damage will always be based off of the listed value here at 0 out of 5. However, it will take advantage of any Frozen Orb legendaries that you have. This means that in Frozen Orb builds, this is a must run because it's extra casts of Frozen Orb for free. In a non-Frozen Orb build, however, this is kind of terrible. There's just so many better options available to you. If you look at it and say that, okay, well, if you're, say, a Chain Lightning build, it doesn't apply to each individual hit of Chain Lightning. It applies to the cast of the skill, meaning you have to spend a cooldown or you have to spend mana. Unfortunately, in my opinion, there are just simply better skills to run that are based off of mana and cooldown consumption. The Arc Lash one is still one of the better ones for cooldowns, and one of the ones that we're going to cover in a minute, which is Chain Lightning, is individually better in that department. This is an F-tier skill. The only exception is in a Frozen Orb build, this goes from F to B. Next up, we have Ice Shards. Ice Shards automatically spawn against frozen enemies. Now, this is very interesting. This will work once per freeze on an enemy. This will not apply to bosses, even though bosses or enemies that have a stagger bar, even though those enemies are treated as being frozen while active, it does not apply in that scenario. This is a B tier skill in freeze-oriented builds that are freezing a lot. It is a F tier skill the rest of the time, because no other builds can take advantage of this outside of Frozen, whereas even Frozen Orb builds can take advantage of it outside of Frozen Orb. So why is this an F tier build, even in an Ice Shard build? An Ice Shard build would actually rather run the Frostbolt one to apply the chill to consistently freeze. This procs some of the other skills that Frostbolts have. For example, Ice Shards deal bonus damage to frozen enemies, and they ricochet off of frozen enemies. So why would I run a skill that gives me extra Ice Shards? That doesn't help me freeze, because remember that Ice Shards do not chill on their own. Ice Shards do not chill. They're one of the only ice skills in the game that do not apply chill. But Frostbolt's enchantment does. Frostbolt's enchantment is just superior in cold builds, particularly in Ice Shard builds. However, this is only good in a frozen build. And if you are assuming that it's good in a Shatter build, I hate to break it to you, but there are better options in a Shatter build than just this. That's why I have this in an F tier. Next up, we have Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning is a B tier. This will give you a free cast of Chain Lightning every time you spend 100 mana. Now, obviously, most lightning skills have a higher most mana skills in the core skill cost around the 30 mana cost range with no reduction. 30, 35, 30, 40, 35, 13 per second. And if you go to Mastery, they're generally in the higher. They're generally around 50. Blizzard is 40. Meteor's 40. Firewall's 30. Ball Lightning is 50. So this means you have to spend either a couple of casts, 2 or 3 casts of a Mastery, or 3 to 4 casts of a bit of a core to get this to form. And it gives you free Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning builds have better options than running this stat. However, any build that is capable of spamming out mana does get the effect. You do have to spend the mana. So Avalanche does not trigger this. Again, another misunderstanding. People think Avalanche triggers this. I think that this skill is okay. I like that it's free Chain Lightning. It's free lightning damage. Battle mages can get some value out of this if you're able to spend a lot of mana and regen a lot of mana. The downside is most of your enchantment slots are going to go towards mana recovery rather than this. I would put this in the same bolt as I would the Frozen Orb. The free cast of the skill is nice to have. In my opinion, it's better for generic builds. It's 100 mana. Any build can spend 100 mana. Any build can get Chain Lightning. That's why it's in B tier, same as Frozen Orb. It's not like F tier and Ice Shard where it needs a specific requirement. Charge Bolts is an interesting one that whenever you stun an enemy, there's a 40% chance to release 3 Charge Bolts from them. It will trigger the Charge Bolt legendaries, like the one where it attracts enemies to it. However, this is F tier because it does take away some of your options. Ice will not use this because they're mostly chilling, they are mostly freezing. Fire will not use this because they're immobilizing. Lightning is the only build that can use this, and Lightning has much better options available to them. Lightning builds generally want to spend a lot of mana, therefore Chain Lightning is a better option. Now the chance at 40% is relatively high, is okay. The fact that it requires you to stun an enemy, a lot of people think, okay, I'll run Arc Lash and I'll run Charge Bolts, right? But it's not a guarantee that you stun an enemy. This skill would be better to me that whenever you stun an enemy, there is a 100% chance to release the Charge Bolt, but you have to increase the amount of enemies that you stun. Let's say that you have to stun 3 or more enemies to get the guaranteed proc for this. I would say that would be a better skill. As it currently stands right now, it's not effective enough. The 40% chance for a mediocre damage skill, it's not even 5 Charge Bolts. It's 3 Charge Bolts. It's not even a free cast of the skill. Chain Lightning is a free cast of Chain Lightning. This is a weaker version. Now, the defensive aspects are relatively interesting because the defensive skills themselves are very good. We've talked about this before covering Sorceress, how all 4 of these skills are very good, and 99% of other classes would love to have one of these skills or multiple of these skills in their build. However, for the most part, the enchantments themselves aren't particularly good. Flame Shield is an F tier one. Flame Shield is essentially an auto revive. Whenever you would take fatal damage, your Flame Shield automatically activates. This effect can only happen once every 120 seconds. Basically, you have a 2-minute cooldown on a skill that gives you an auto revive. And the effects of Flame Shield will stack, meaning you will get the 50% of missing life heal off of that initial Flame Shield. So this is a very good skill to run. This is my mandatory skill on Sorceress. I see hardcore Sorceresses that don't run this, and I just look at them like, are you fucking crazy? And I don't understand why people think that this is, like, not worth running. This is very good. One of the best skills in the game to run because of the revive on it. Now, most sorceresses are generally running Fire Bolt as their mandatory one because of that burning damage. I'm fine with that, but the majority of my characters, if I can make a sorceress enchantment like a permanent slot, it's going to be the Flame Shield one for how good it is. It's an auto revive. Teleport. This one is F tier. This is shit. What this does is it replaces evade with a short-range version of teleport on a 17-second cooldown, which is longer than the base teleport and longer than the base evade. Now, the thing is, this essentially does give you extra charges of evade. Your evade charges will be replaced with teleport charges on the longer cooldowns. And remember that you do get the effects of teleport on it. So essentially, you can get an extra cast of teleport just on a much more significant cooldown. However, the individual evades themselves being on shorter cooldowns is more valuable unless you are specifically trying to get the teleport damage reduction or the crackling energy. The problem with that, in my opinion, is it's not worth this slot. This is unfortunately one of the worst enchantments out there. It's an F tier. Next up, we have the Ice Armor enchantment. This is upon getting hit, you have a 5% chance to apply Ice Armor. This will not apply to damage over time effects, and this will only apply the base version of Ice Armor. Meaning, it doesn't matter how much you level it, you're not going to be getting the value out of it. Now, here's what we want to talk about in regards to this. While Ice Armor is active, you deal 5% of your damage dealt will be added to its barrier. That is there. The problem is this is a relatively random chance. It's a 5% chance on hit to apply. If you're getting hit by a lot of little enemies, this can trigger. Like if you walk into a pack of ghouls, you can trigger this. The downside is you do have to pay attention to your health and your skill bar to notice when it's active in order to know when it's there. Another thing I just want to mention is that there is a skill for Sorceress. Taking direct damage has an X chance to reset the cooldown of one of your defensive skills. This can range anywhere from 3 to 9%, and I personally think that that legendary aspect is better than this enchantment because it applies to your chosen defensive skill as opposed to Ice Armor. If you already have Ice Armor equipped, this can be nice, but in my opinion, it's not as good as you think it is. I would personally prefer that this be buffed a little bit. I would maybe consider reworking this. So, for example, enemies that hit you while Ice Armor is active refund, say, 5 mana. That would be a decent enchantment to run. But in its current state right now, this is B tier at best, F tier at worst. Then the other one that you have is F tier as well. This is the Frost Nova. This is a lucky hit. Conjuration skills have a 30% chance to unleash a Frost Nova when hitting enemies. So, first off, you have to run a Conjuration skill. Second off, you have to run Frost Nova. That means you're losing 2 of your potential slots. Third is that this is a lucky hit trigger. Okay. Lucky hit trigger off of Conjuration skills. Hydra has a very low lucky hit chance because the Hydra hits rapidly. Ice Blades has a very low lucky hit chance because it hits enemies for a decent duration. And Lightning Spear has a very low lucky hit chance because it hits multiple enemies by bouncing around. Okay. So, we have a skill that requires you to lose multiple skill slots, lose an enchantment slot, lucky hit chance on less effective skills. What is the overwhelmingly positive benefit? You have a 30% chance to unleash Frost Nova. From you, not from enemies. Aren't most of the Conjuration skills long range, passive damage options? Like Hydra and Lightning Spear. Oh. So it's shit. If you absolutely desperately need to freeze shit, you know what you run? You run Frostbolt, which is better. Or, God forbid, you run base Frost Nova. It's actually not a bad skill. This is not good. The only time you will ever run this is specifically in the Conjuration build that runs all 3 Conjurations. And that's not a very good build to be running. That being said, that's B tier in that build, F tier in the rest of the builds. Now we move on to the conjurations. Now, the conjurations themselves are relatively interesting because Ice Blades and Lightning Spear have no mana cost, they're cooldowns, which are very valuable given that most of the offensive options you have as a sorceress require mana. Those two don't. Hydra is passive damage, it lasts time. It's like a minion that has a mana cost to it. But what's valuable about it is you can cast it one time and forget about it, so the mana cost is mitigated because of the duration of the skill. So some players will run a conjuration. Most players won't run multiple conjurations, and there are wildly different conjurations then compared to each other. However, the enchantments aren't really great. Hydra's is a B tier at best. It's 200 mana spent. The same rules that apply to Chain Lightning apply to it. You have to physically spend the mana. You cannot trigger it off of something like Avalanche. You will then spawn a 5-headed Hydra for 5 seconds. So it's half the duration of a normal Hydra. However, it does have 2 extra heads. Little less than double the damage, but for half the time. It will not, however, apply any of the bonus effects on it other than Summoned Hydra. Invoked Hydra and Enhanced Hydra do not count on that. I have checked that. This is B tier in builds that spend a lot of mana. You can run Chain Lightning and Hydra and run a chain build and be okay. The 5-headed Hydra, also by having extra Hydras up, you can get a lot of passive burning damage going. I personally think that this is F tier. I'm putting this in B tier because this does fit any build. Any build can run this if they so choose. However, I personally think it's F tier. I think it's a worse version of the Chain Lightning, and I think for passive damage it's outmatched by Firebolt. I think it's even outmatched by Fireball. But it fits in a lot of builds. Next up, we have Ice Blades. Every 40 seconds that you spend in cooldowns, you will spawn an Ice Blade on one random enemy. Now, this is an interesting F tier choice, in that it is very easy to proc this. Again, there's a lot of defensive cooldowns, there's a lot of ultimate cooldowns, and remember that this can stack. Meaning, if I were to activate, say, Flame Shield and Frost Nova, at the end of the cooldowns, both of those cooldowns at the same time... Oh, fuck you. At the end of both of those cooldowns at the same time, I would be getting the free Frost Nova. However, big however, the Ice Blade is only spawning on one enemy. It's not staying up. It'll stay up for the 6 seconds, but it's only going to be on that one enemy. It also doesn't apply any of the Ice Blade's effects, like the cooldown reduction or anything like that, although that's kind of counterintuitive. Because of the nature of how the Ice Blades themselves work, this is unfortunately a situation of, even though it's easy to proc the effect of Ice Blades, the payoff is not very strong. Therefore, it's an F tier. Even if it fits multiple builds, it's not even worth taking the slot like you could argue on Hydra or Chain Lightning, where it's not great, but it fits any build. Next up, you have Lightning Spear. This is absorbing crackling energy, has a 10% chance to conjure a Lightning Spear. Now, again, this is going to be F tier for all builds and B tier for crackling energy. This is going to be very similar to the Spark ruling, where that killing an enemy forms crackling energy. This one is absorbing crackling energy, gives you a free Lightning Spear. If you're running crackling energy, you're probably going to run Lightning Spear. Lightning Spear does have a bonus attached to it. Here we go. Collecting crackling energy increases the damage of your next Lightning Spear cast. This specifically will not apply to the enchantment, so you don't have to worry about losing that Lightning Spear charges. on that free cast. But collecting the crackling energy will build up to that. Remember, you need to take 8 lightning spears in order to, or 8 crackling energies in order to increase the damage on your next lightning spear. This is good in that crackling energy build. Like we said before, this is a mainstay in that build in particular. However, big however, the rest of the builds don't take advantage of it. Lastly, we're going to come down to the last 4. These skills are the mastery skills. Now, a lot of players like mastery skills. They tend to build heavily into 1 or 2 of these. Meteor and Firewall are both solid options. I've seen a few Blizzard players that run strictly Blizzard. Most people generally tend to run Blizzard plus something else, like Ball Lightning. They run Ball Lightning plus something else. The higher mana cost with these would make you assume that the skills, enchantments, are more powerful. That's not always the case. The Blizzard enchantment, this is S tier. Every 15 seconds, a blizzard will form over you and follow you for 6 seconds. The reason why this is good is a couple of reasons. 1, the mastery in your Paragon tree, the mastery board, will affect that enchantment. 2, the defensive legendary aspect, where you get damage reduction while in your blizzard and for leaving it, will apply off of this skill. And 3, the blizzard following you is very good, because one of the biggest issues with blizzard is if you cast it in the wrong location, you kind of lose the damage output. With this, you can walk in and do that. It also applies an increased bonus to chill, because this is an extra form of chill you can do. Any ice sorceress, this is kind of mandatory. Non-ice sorceresses would consider running this if you want to run the damage reduction aspect, just so you can get the advantage of that damage reduction randomly. You have to look every 15 seconds, you're getting that blizzard, you're getting that passive damage reduction, and it's going to carry over for 3 seconds afterwards. So essentially, for every 15 seconds, you'll get 9 seconds of the damage reduction, meaning you only have to wait 12 seconds before your next one procs, giving you the damage reduction. Meteor. Lucky hit, 8% chance, meteor to fall on enemies. This is F tier. First off, it's lucky hit chance. Lucky hit chance is relatively easy to proc on sorceress. The downside is that it's a low chance on a lucky hit chance. The meteor that falls will not apply meteor effects outside of a few niche legendary effects. There's a lot of legendary effects for meteor. The passive of enhanced meteor does not apply because you're not casting it. The wizard's meteor or the mage's meteor will apply. However, lucky hit chance with a low chance to cast, in my opinion, this is F tier. Fire sorceresses have much better options available to them. Both Fireball and the Firebolt are better options. Firewall. Okay, another lucky hit chance. However, this is actually pretty good. It's a 25% chance when you deal burning damage to spawn 2 firewalls for 3 seconds. Now, the firewalls don't deal as much damage because they're not up for 8 seconds. They're only up for 3 seconds. However, having a higher percentage on a lucky hit chance is very good for the build. And in addition to that, this fits in burning damage. This is a B tier skill. The reason why I would say it's B tier is if you are stacking the Firebolt enchantment where you're getting more burning damage, this will affect off of that. This means that these 2 enchantments combined can give you free casts of Firewall in builds that don't run any fire skills whatsoever. Just using the burning damage from the other skill to apply this. So, either that or you can do it on Hydra. Even though that's a lower lucky hit proc, if you are running Hydra, you can get value off of this. So, in my opinion, this is a B tier. It does require, any build can run it, but it does require another skill to be useful. Last but not least, we have Ball Lightning. Ball Lightning is kind of interesting to me in that this one is kind of S tier. Any build that critting can take advantage of it. This means that all lightning and all fire builds can take advantage of it because they build around crit. Frost might not be able to take advantage of it, but you can work to it to a certain extent as well, although I think Frost is better options. Lucky Hit. Any critical strike has a 25% chance to spawn static ball lightning. Now, this is very good in my opinion because this is applying off of crits. Sorceresses can massively increase their crit chance almost to near 100%. And because of that, I've seen Wuji has a hardcore build right now in season where he literally has 100% crit chance on his lightning sorceress. This ball lightning enchantment is fucking fantastic with that because it's just constantly, you know, it's a 1 in 4 ball lightning. So this is S tier. So when we cover the S tier skills that a lot of people are running, you have ball lightning, you have blizzard, you have flame shield, you have firebolt, and you have arc lash. Those are the 5, and you can make an argument for frostbolt being up there, but I did talk about it a lot. You can make an argument maybe for fireball being there, and you can maybe make an argument for firewall, but that requires another S tier one, so I'd leave that in B. Interestingly enough, ultimates don't have enchantments, which makes sense because you can't run multiple ultimates, whereas you could with enchantments. So, for example, you could potentially put 1 point into Inferno for an enchantment off of it. So that's why these don't have enchantments. However, in my opinion, I think that there should be the ability to give up an enchantment slot to have an extra upgrade to that particular ultimate. That could be a buff you could improve the enchantment system on. The obvious answer for me when it comes to enchantments is I want to run multiple enchantments. We should be able to have a 3rd, if not 4th enchantment slot. You could set it up at 15, 35, 55, and 75 is how I would set up the enchantment slots. Either that, or if this game does decide to add a prestige route for classes that want to rebuild their characters all over again, and you want to give prestige rewards, that's something Diablo hasn't really done, I could definitely see an extra enchantment slot as being a sorceress prestige reward. At least until they rebalance this.